From the oracles of the deep past to the modern realm of the psychic spy, governments and intelligence agencies have used remote viewing to answer the unanswerable, a specialized technique to secretively gain information on anything. It's up to us as individuals to take our power back, to know the truth, to become our own psychic spies. Deep underground, within the strata of material that stretches to the core of this planet Earth, there are legends of civilizations within the expansive hollows of rocks, filled with trees, enlightened beings, ancient animals, rivers, mountains, and even a sun. This is inner Earth. But is it something tangible, something that exists, perhaps a dimensional construct unseen by physical eyes, or maybe even a tall tale? I'm John Vivanco, and welcome to the Archives. You know, when you're exploring the woods, the desert, or your city's sewer tunnels, do you ever wonder if that cave you're in is going to lead you to a civilization deep inside the earth? I definitely do, and this is because with the amount of remote viewing data we've had on this type of subject, we often see this idea existing in some capacity. And through the years, our team has viewed this as well as many other remote viewers, and the same stuff shows up whenever it's viewed, this idea of cities and great beings living underground. But how are we to take this data, this information? Is there some sort of proof that one can be led to in order to begin to ascertain the reality of it? We do know that remote viewers can and will dive into stories about things and describe them whether they're true or not, unless it's tasked properly to them. And they can also jump these dimensional realities and describe that as if it were a physical reality for us. To start though, let's go way back to the origination point of this story as we've heard throughout history. The story of Shambhala dates back thousands of years and predates Tibetan Buddhism with the Zhangzung culture and the Kalachakra Tantra, which was an ancient manuscript that spoke of it. You can also find reference to it in ancient Hindu texts. Now, the word Shambhala is Sanskrit and means place of peace, and some people also refer to it as Shangri-La. It's been described as a pure land where all inhabitants are enlightened, and it exists in the area between the Himalayan mountain range and the Gobi Desert. Many actually place Shambhala inside Mount Kailash, which has some very incredible legends outside of Shambhala, and it's actually a heavily restricted area by the government, one that you can't just go explore because of its sacredness. Now, the idea that this location is within the earth or inner earth comes from ancient scripts, as well as legends from the Tibetan Buddhists themselves. Some legends state that one of the entrances is through an abandoned monastery in Tibet and is guarded by the so-called Shambhala guardians. And then you have supposed entrances at the North and South poles, but these are to inner earth in general, right? And they're not necessarily Shambhala. Shambhala has in fact thought to be the capital of inner earth. Now, there's a lot of lore surrounding the potential entry of an individual into this guarded paradise as well. It's said that you have to have the karma to be enlightened or pure of heart in order to go there, as well as an invitation. And this is interesting from the standpoint of governments who have funded expeditions to try and find it. You probably didn't know this, but the Nazis not only tried to find it, but so did the US, the Soviets, the Chinese. And why did they want to find it? Well, one of those reasons, there are legends of powerful mystical weapons that they may have, as well as being able to take it over in order to capture the minds of the Asian surface world and potentially control it. Doesn't sound so pure of heart, does it? Nicholas and Helena Roreich in the 1920s spent around 3 years searching for Shambhala and were funded by the US government and potentially Russia. They were thought to have been double agents, receiving funding from the United States, yet giving information to the Bolsheviks in Russia. The Nazis were interested in finding Shambhala, not only from the standpoint of controlling the Asian world, but they were also looking to establish the Germanic link with a race of enlightened Nordic-looking super beings who lived within the earth. Now, I bet those supernatural weapons sounded pretty good too. And then you have Admiral Byrd from the United States, who had also reportedly searched and found the inner Earth entrance, then met with beings there. Now this was actually the North Pole, South Pole deal, and not necessarily entry into Shambhala, since that supposedly exists in the Tibet area underground. Now there's also this very fascinating story in a book called The Smoky God, originally published I think in 1908. It's an account of a Norwegian sailor named Olaf Jansen who sailed with his father on a fishing trip up to the north. And on this trip, Olaf claimed that he and his father entered into inner Earth at the North Pole and spent a couple of years there. They visited with the beings who lived there, they learned some of their language and they toured many fascinating places within the Earth. When they exited inner Earth, they ended up coming out of the South Pole. Subsequently, their ship ran into a storm and sunk, with his father dying and Olaf being rescued. Now, when Olaf claimed to the public when he got back home that they'd been in Earth for a couple of years, they placed him under lock and key, thinking he was crazy. So does Shambhala and inner Earth world truly exist in the three-dimensional plane, or is it a spiritual utopia? Maybe even a tall tale that's taken on an imaginative life of its own. We're going to explore some specific incidents with remote viewing so we can try and untangle some of these questions. So let's first have a look at the Roreichs, interesting couple, and try and see if we can get some indication with remote viewing if they actually found anything. In 1923, a couple arrived in Darjeeling, India with a veiled intent to find the mystical hidden land of Shambhala. Nicholas and Elena Roreich were Russian expatriates traveling under the auspices of cataloging the art and culture of Central Asia when they made their way to Tibet. Little did anyone know, they were actually there under the funding of the United States government, searching for the fabled Shambhala. Nicholas was a well-known painter, and he was an archaeologist, was a bit eccentric, and was considered by some in the US government to be a guru. His wife, Elena, had translated Madame Blavatsky's book, The Secret Doctrine, into Russian, which spoke of Shambhala. So while the Roreichs were living in New York City, they came to believe in this story of the lost city. Elena, while doing these esoteric practices, came into contact psychically with a being called Master Morya, who urged them to try and find the city themselves. Because the Roreichs had friends in very high positions connected to the President of the United States, they were able to receive funding in order to search for this fabled paradise. A rumor states that they were even given a piece of what is called the Chintamani stone to bring back to Shambhala. The Chintamani stone is also called the wish-fulfilling jewel, which appeared in Hindu scripts as a magical item that could lead someone into enlightenment. And legends state that they were looking to bring this piece back to Shambhala, which had come off of the main stone that sat within this spiritual world underground. And they probably actually also thought this was somewhat of a ticket to get access. Maybe someone in the United States government was interested to see if they could pull it off. At that period of time, in the early 20th century, the Tibetan plateau was pretty much closed off to all foreigners. So when the Roreichs arrived in Darjeeling, they had to get permission in order to head there, which they were able to secure after some time. Now the Roreichs, they were not trained spies, but it is believed that they were acting as double agents for the Bolsheviks out of Russia as well. It's rumored that they had received surreptitious funding from the Russians, and part of this was to track spies from other countries as well as locate Shambhala. So you had many countries at this time vying to understand and gain control of this part of the world. But ultimately, were the Roreichs successful in finding or at least locating this ancient fabled city? We sought a couple different avenues to confirm or deny whether they had found anything. They had disappeared at one point and no one knew of their whereabouts. In fact, most had presumed they were dead on the Tibetan plateau somewhere. Yet they reappeared a year later. So with remote viewing, we wanted to know what happened in this time frame. Where were they? What were they doing? Were they in Shambhala during this time having a party, or were they lost in the expanse of the Tibetan Plateau? So with a team of remote viewers, we tasked them on this particular question. Our data described that during the year they were out of touch. We've got these general issues anyone would face on an expedition like this. You know, they were working to get food, they were gathering information, they were going through this struggle, trying to keep a safe balance within a dangerous adventure. And there was also this indication that some of the expedition party had become separated and possibly died. You know, there was this stress that they had within the data, a lot of it, but there was also this indication that Nicholas Roreich was heavily involved in creating his artwork, painting the landscapes of the Tibetan Plateau. Now, as a fairly famous artist, working in the plein air style of that time, he was creating paintings of the beautiful scenery that they were encountering, as well as these fantasy paintings of what he was seeing internally. So it gets to a point where our data begins to describe the Roreichs as having an experience related to something paraphysical that was in the air flying around them. And paraphysical is a term we use in remote viewing to denote something that's outside of our physical dimension, but still able to interact with it. Now what's interesting is that in Nicholas Roreich's diary, he stated they had begun to see strange lights in the sky in this time frame. In fact, in this general period of time, his writings became more vague and esoteric with references to things that they were experiencing which were non-physical. And our data reflected this as well, that they were going into more of this inner space within themselves in order to raise their vibration by doing these esoteric practices. And it seemed that it was related to the experiences that they were having visually. And this makes perfect sense because, you know, it's said that you can't enter into Shambhala unless you're invited, and well, you know, to put it bluntly, of a more higher vibration. And this is what it appeared that they were doing during that year time frame. They were spending their time meditating, trying to raise their vibration because they felt that they were very close. To a degree, they were being guided by something outside of themselves, but this does not appear in our data to reflect anything physical. And because they were working on their own vibrational state, they knew that this was the only way to get into Shambhala. In fact, the high vibrational state is part of that invitation. It appears that you just can't go roaring into this place from the standpoint of a selfish 3D reality individual, which is what the people or governments represented. Now, the governments seek and want control over things, from the minds of the people to the treasures to the potential weapons there. So they had to shift away from that in order to even come close. And my sense is that they knew this all along, but they needed the funding to get up there. And I wonder if overall that compromised them. So in this year, they encountered a path to it in a non-physical way. There's no indication that they went to a physical place inside the earth, though. But what about outside of this year time frame? You know, when they got back to the United States after this first expedition, the US government funded another one to Manchuria, where they continued the search. Now, on the second expedition, though, back in the States, there were people in government who were more vocal about their connection with the Russians. And because of this, they were called back to the United States and the expedition was canceled. Shortly after this, they moved to India. And I assume that they continued the search from there as well. But, you know, really, did they ultimately find it physically? And the data on this basically portrays a disconnection within the Roreichs. There's this lack of energy and vibration within them. In other words, their vibration was not high enough to get there. They could not resonate to the same frequency as Shambhala. And we see this a lot with regard to portals. You know, everything's a vibration, and in order to enter a portal, one needs to move their vibration to the same frequency. Otherwise, they won't even perceive that there is a portal. This is the same thing. Their vibration just wasn't high enough. And I think this makes perfect sense because they were funded by governments. who wanted to manipulate whatever was found. And it did seem that they were playing double agents. Now, this ultimately does not tell us whether Shambhala is something actually physical or not, if it even matters. In this project on the Roreich, we have more of a vibrational and spiritual construct occurring, which could tell us that this place is dimensional, as opposed to being like pure physical. But, we're still on the search with remote viewing, so let's try a different angle on this to understand just what Shambhala is. Is it deep in the earth physically? Is it a spiritual mind state or dimensional and spiritual reality outside of the physical? This is really our ultimate question, to know what realm this fabled land exists in. Could a person just find a cave and, walk down some stairs and enter into a magical kingdom greeted by enlightened beings? Or is it something else? So looking at the reality of Shambhala to describe any physical aspects, if they exist, and if not, whether it's a fable or something else, the viewers describe an attitude and experience within an individual that leads into a pure heart and mind space. Pure of heart, pure of mind. To be vibrationally high and vibrationally pure. This is an enlightened space, a place that, at the very least, you need to be pure and on the path, if not already enlightened. So that could be someone physical going there who is in that state, but the next thing that arises in the data, well, it's the mysterious yet seemingly ubiquitous portal, and you know the drill. When you have a portal, you usually have a transition to another realm or dimension. So a shift in a vibrational state occurs in an individual, and if they have the karma or they're pure of heart and they're in the right location on earth, they can tune themselves to this entry point. Unless you're visiting astrally or psychically, you would leave your body behind. So the data appears to go down this path of this place being non-physical. Yet a physical being can make entry, but it appears they will leave their body behind or it will transform more into light. And the earth holds and sustains many different frequencies, and there are multiple locations where, if you're pure of heart, enlightened, or seeking, you can be invited in, or at the very least shown. Now obviously Tibet is one of these locations, and the Roreichs were trying to open this up for themselves once they realized it was not a physical location. The viewers describe moving through this portal and into a beautiful realm where only love and enlightenment exists. There are beings there who exist as mostly light, yet some also do have these characteristics that we would recognize as being humanoid, from large, somewhat slanted eyes, long blonde hair, to beings who appear like rainbows. Every being is equal there, and there's this unity consciousness, yet they do appear to have leadership roles as well. This is a higher dimensional world, but we also do at times see structures. They're reminiscent of pagodas and more of an Asian style architecture with lush plants and water all around. But this could be more of a representation for the viewers within a shifting mind fabric that's recognizable to them. Some energetic taste of Asian and Tibetan style structures because of the human mind imprint on it. Higher dimensional realities are more malleable with the mind as well. And on top of that, remote viewers do have to go through an interpretation process to convert these experiences into language. So these realities can and often present in a way that is recognizable to an individual when remote viewing it. But what we have here appears to be another dimensional reality, not unlike the idea of heaven within Christianity. And you can't just walk down some stairs into the earth to get there. You need to vibrate to the frequency of a portal that leads there in a specific location on earth, and then you can go. So we're on the quest to find out what kind of physical experiences are real when it comes to inner earth now. Shambhala appears to be more of a dimensional situation that overlaps the earth. But what's going on down there? Is inner earth just a big portal, and if you get in, do you end up in a different world and dimension? I go to many different mountain locations, I meditate and I hike around, and I have certain tells that happen to me physically when something's there. It's like this physical and psychic pressure in my head. And I've come across locations where there are these highly charged energetic zones. I could hear and feel the frequency. Because of that, I've seen things that have opened up into another location, another land, another realm. So I understand, what the Rorichs were going after here at a certain point in the expedition. And to a degree, they were vibrationally high enough to recognize that this is what they had to do to realize what it truly was. That this is a place inside of us, all of us. It's both a physical path, in the case of them, to this entry point, but it's also about the internal journey. You think about the metaphorical situation here and what is truly important. So what does a person do when they seek enlightenment, for instance? They go inside themselves. They quiet the brain. Shambhala is an enlightened land, this world that exists within the earth. So this is a representation of the inner journey to reach this enlightened and free place. Irregardless of physical things seen and unseen, the internal journey is what it is all about, to remind us that this is truly where you're going to find it. Stay tuned for part 2 on Chasing Shambhala, where we're going to go into the rest of this. What is the smoky god all about? And what about Admiral Byrd's diary? Is that real? Did he enter into inner earth, perhaps Shambhala, to meet the so-called master, as his diary alludes? And you'll probably be surprised at what Operation High Jump was really all about. So join me next time on the Archives. Until then.